The rain did not stop. 3 days straight. Amara's back did not stop either. 6 years of aching and counting. She lifted the wood onto her head. Wet, heavy, familiar, she hummed. She always hummed on this road. Not a song she learned. A song that had learned her long before she could remember. In a voice she could barely picture anymore. She did not see the convoy. She did not see the horses stop, guards' hands fly to their swords, or the king step down into the mud. She only heard a man's voice, cracked, disbelieving, finish the last line of the tune with her. That had not happened in 22 years. 6 years earlier, Ngozi sang when she worked. She sang grinding cassava. She sang stirring soup over the fire. She sang plaiting Amara's hair by lamplight. Her fingers quick and gentle. Her voice low, so the neighbors wouldn't hear and ask questions she never wanted to answer. It was a simple tune, 4 lines, no more. But Ngozi sang it like it carried something too heavy for words to hold. An 8-year-old Amara never asked what that something was. Children rarely question the air they breathe. "Mama, where did you learn that song?" Amara asked once, small fingers tugging at her mother's wrapper. Ngozi's hands paused, just for a moment, over the cassava. "A very long time ago," she said, "in a place far from here. One day I will tell you properly. Not today. That day never came." Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The fever arrived in the rainy season, the way fevers often did in Umwobi, and it took 11 days to finish what it started. Amara fetched water. She wiped her mother's forehead with cool cloth. She begged the herbalist for medicine the family couldn't pay for. And the herbalist, moved by an 8-year-old's tears, gave what he could for free. It was not enough. On the last night, Ngozi was too weak to speak. She reached for Amara's hand instead and hummed the tune one final time, so faint her daughter had to lean close just to catch it. Her lips moved around the last note long after the sound itself had stopped. By morning, Amara was an orphan. The funeral was small, as funerals for poor widows in Umwobi tended to be a handful of neighbors. A short prayer from the village priest, distracted, already thinking of the next burial waiting on his calendar. No drummers, no professional mourners, none of the elaborate send-off a woman with more coin might have received. Amara stood at the graveside in a borrowed black wrapper 2 sizes too large, gripping her mother's one remaining comb in her fist so tightly the teeth left marks in her palm, and did not cry, because some part of her, even at 8 years old, understood that crying in front of this particular gathering of neighbors would only invite the kind of pitying looks she already couldn't stand. She hummed instead, so quietly only she could hear it, as the first handfuls of red earth fell onto the wrapped body below. The tune was the only thing her mother left behind that the debt collectors couldn't touch. They took the cooking pots, they took the good wrapper Ngozi had been saving for Amara's naming ceremony gift, years down the line, when she came of age. They left the goal with nothing but 4 notes, and a grief too big for her small body to carry alone. Her father's sister, Chidinma, took her in not out of love, but because the village elders shamed her into it, in front of the whole compound. "She is blood," old Ponambi had said, loud enough for every neighbor gathered at the funeral to hear. "Blood does not leave blood in the road, Chidinma." Chidinma's smile, Amara would remember years later, had not reached her eyes even once during that entire exchange. That night, in the privacy of her own hut, Chidinma spoke differently to her husband, Amara's uncle Imeka, a quiet man who rarely argued with his wife about anything. "One more mouth," she muttered, sweeping the floor with more force than the dust required, as if 3 children were not enough. "She is family," Imeka said, not looking up from his palm wine. "Family?" Chidinma repeated, tasting the word like something sour. "Fine, family works. We will see how useful this particular piece of family turns out to be." Amara, listening from just outside the doorway, understood faster than an 80-year-old should ever have to understand anything exactly what kind of home she had just entered. She slept on the veranda, never inside. She ate what remained after Chidinma's 3 children had eaten their fill, and some nights there was less than nothing at all. And every single day, rain, dry season, market day, feast day, she was sent to the forest edge with a rope and a machete to cut firewood, not for the household's own cooking fire, but to sell in the market, the coins pressed straight into Chidinma's waiting palm before Amara's fingers had even finished letting go. "You eat my food," Chidinma told her that very first week, crouching close enough that Amara could smell the palm wine on her breath. "You will earn it, every single day, or you will not eat at all." Amara nodded. She had already learned not to answer back. She kept humming anyway, quietly, when no one was close enough to hear. It was the one thing Chidinma couldn't take, because Chidinma didn't know yet that it was worth taking. The first year was the hardest, in the way first years of grief always are. Amara's hands blistered. Her shoulders learned to carry weight they hadn't been built for yet. She stopped crying at night, not because the pain lessened, but because she learned crying changed nothing, and the wood still needed cutting in the morning either way. She hummed instead, on the long walk to the forest edge, on the longer walk back, bundled balanced and swaying, in the goat shed, where she sometimes slept when the veranda flooded during the worst of the rains. The tune became less a memory of her mother and more a kind of breathing automatic. Necessary, barely noticed by the girl doing it. Chidinma noticed it exactly once, early on, and told her sharply to stop that noise before it woke the children. Amara learned to hum quietly enough that no one but herself could hear it after that. The seasons turned, then turned again. Amara turned 10, then 12, then 14. And every year the firewood quota grew a little heavier, because as Chidinma liked to say, loudly, to anyone in the market who would listen, she is stronger now. She can carry more. Amara's shoulders did not grow to match the weight. They simply learned to bear what they were given. The way a river learns the shape of the rock it has worn smooth over years of relentless water. The village had a name for her by the time she was 12. Not Amara. The firewood girl, some of the youngest children in Amwabi, the ones born after Ngozi's death, genuinely believed it was her actual name, and no one ever bothered to correct them. Firewood girl. Firewood girl. A cluster of children chanted once, trailing her through the market square, laughing the easy, thoughtless laugh of children who have never once gone hungry. "Does the wood talk back to you? Is that why you hum?" Amara kept walking. She had learned that response only fed the game. Boys who had once chased her through the compound as a small child now looked past her entirely, the way people look past a wall or a well present, useful, unremarkable. Girls her own age wore new wrappers each festival season and gathered in laughing clusters by the stream, braiding each other's hair, comparing suitors. Amara walked past them with her firewood bundle and her one faded cloth, mended so many times over so many years that its original color had become a matter of guesswork. Chidinma's own daughter, Ifeoma, was given everything Amara was denied. New cloth at every festival, a place inside, by the fire, on cold nights, school fees paid, however reluctantly, so she could learn her letters at the mission house 3 villages over. Amara had asked, once, whether she might attend the mission house too. Chidinma had laughed, not cruelly, exactly worse than cruelly, like the question itself was absurd, something a goat might have asked if goats could speak. "Firewood does not need letters," she said. "Firewood needs strong arms." Amara never asked again, but she watched Ifeoma leave for the mission house every morning, satchel over one shoulder, and something in her chest tightened each time, quiet and persistent, like a stone she carried alongside the wood. When it rained, and in Umwobi, the rains came hard and often, and without much warning, Ifeoma stayed inside, dry and warm by the cooking fire, sometimes reading aloud from her lesson books just within earshot of the veranda, as though she wanted Amara to hear exactly what she was missing. Amara went out anyway. A full quota was a full quota, Chidinma had made very clear. On more than one occasion involving a switch from the guava tree, exactly what happened to girls who came home with an empty basket. She hummed through all of it, through the cold that cracked her bare feet raw, through the ache that had settled so deep into her back she sometimes forgot what it felt like not to hurt, through the loneliness that pressed in tighter than the rain ever could, because at least the rain eventually stopped, and the loneliness never did. Once, Ifeoma found her humming behind the cooking hut, and stood watching for a long moment before speaking. "What is that song?" Ifeoma asked, not unkindly, for once, simple curiosity. The kind cousins might share, if 9 years of unequal treatment hadn't already built a wall between them, too tall to see over. "My mother's," Amara said, guarded, ready for the question to turn into another weapon. "It's pretty," Ifema said instead, and for one strange, suspended moment, something almost like friendship flickered between them. Then Chidinma's voice called from inside the compound, sharp and impatient, and Ifema turned and left, without another word, and the moment closed as quickly as it had opened. Amara treasured that fragment anyway. She had so few of them to choose from. At night, in the goat shed or on the flooding veranda, she began, without quite deciding to, adding small variations to the tune, not changing it, never changing the four notes themselves, but wrapping little hums and pauses around them, the way a person might return again and again to touch a smooth stone in their pocket. It became less a memory and more a companion, something that walked beside her through the wet forest and the empty market stalls and the long, unbroken years. The tune was the one warm thing she owned, and no one could tax it, sell it, or take it from her hands. Chidinma's patience for feeding another mouth for nothing, as she still called Amara, despite 8 years of unpaid labor, that had more than covered any debt, real or imagined, had worn thin as old cloth, and thin patience, in a woman like Chidinma, did not disappear quietly. It sharpened into something new. She began comparing the two girls out loud, in the market, in front of buyers, in front of the very people who purchased Amara's firewood, as if humiliation were simply another commodity she had learned to sell alongside the wood itself. "This one is good for nothing but wood and water," she would say, gesturing at Amara without even looking at her directly. "My Ifema, now she will marry well. She has been raised properly." The buyers would laugh along, the way people laugh at cruelty when it costs them nothing to agree with it. Amara would stand there with her empty basket and her aching shoulders and say nothing at all, because saying anything had only ever made things worse. Worse than the words, though worse even than the public shame of them, was the isolation Chidinma built around Amara with quiet. She began whispering to the other women of Amwobi, over the washing stones, over the cooking fires, that Amara was cursed. Her mother died young. Chidinma told old Mama Yuju on washing day, loud enough that she clearly meant to be overheard. Her father before that. "There is something in that bloodline the ancestors are not pleased with. I keep her out of kindness. You understand. But I would not wish that girl on anyone's son." Mama Yuju, never one to question a good piece of gossip, carried the story onward within the week, and by the time it had passed through 3 more households it had grown teeth. Chidinma had never intended, or perhaps had intended, all along. It was a lie, and Chidinma knew it was a lie, built for exactly one purpose, to make certain no family in Amwobi ever asked her to release the girl. A firewood seller's daily income, after all, does not walk itself out the compound gate on its own, and a niece married off to some other household was a niece no longer earning coins for Chidinma's palm. Amara heard the whispers. Everyone hears whispers eventually. In a village, small enough that news travels faster than the rain clouds do. She heard them at the well. She heard them at the market. Once, painfully, she heard them from a boy she'd secretly hoped might one day look at her the way boys looked at Ifema, a boy named Uch, who had been kind to her exactly twice in her life, and who now avoided her eyes entirely whenever they passed on the road. She said nothing in response to any of it. 8 years had taught her that silence cost her less than protest ever did, and protests, in Chidinma's house, always cost something. The rumor grew teeth of its own that year, as rumors do when left unchallenged long enough. At a village meeting called to discuss the coming harvest festival, one of the elders, a cautious man named Obi, more concerned with tradition than truth, raised the question of whether the cursed girl should even be permitted to attend the festival dances at all, lest her presence sour the season's fortune. "She has done nothing but work since she arrived in this village," Pianamdi said sharply, the same elder who had shamed Chidinma into taking Amara in 9 years earlier. "I have never once seen a curse in an empty stomach and a full firewood basket." "And yet, look at her luck," Obika countered. "Mother dead, father before that. No suitor has ever once looked her way. Tell me that is only coincidence." The meeting ended without resolution, but word of it reached Amara by evening anyway, carried the way all things were carried in Amwobi, mouth to mouth, faster than truth could ever hope to travel. She was not invited to the festival dances that year. She spent the evening instead, sitting alone at the forest edge, listening to distant drums and laughter drift across the fields, humming her mother's tune quietly to herself until the music in the village finally died down and the night belonged to her again. But some nights, alone on the veranda with rain hammering the thatch roof above her and the whole compound asleep, she hummed the tune until the tears came, and cried until the humming started again on its own, because it was easier to survive an ache with a melody underneath it than to survive it with nothing at all. She did not know, on those nights, that the tune she hummed to keep herself alive had once been sung inside palace walls 3 days' journey from where she now slept on a wet veranda floor. She did not know that her mother's careful silence about where the song came from had not been an accident. The last thing Njozi had been able to give her daughter, even if Amara wouldn't understand it for years still to come. Then, for one brief season, something in Amara's grinding routine shifted, and shifted toward light for the first time in longer than she could remember. An old cloth merchant named Baba Ez had begun passing through Umwabi twice a month on his trade route, and he was, by nature and by long habit, a man who noticed things other people walked straight past. He noticed that the girl everyone called the Firewood girl always carried her bundle with her back straight. No matter how heavy the load, he noticed she hummed, low and constant, the way some people breathe through their nose without thinking about it. One afternoon, waiting for a cartwheel to be repaired at the blacksmith's stall, he asked her to hum the tune again, slower this time, so he could hear it properly. She did. Confused but not afraid, Baba S had a gentle face, the kind that made strangers trust him without quite knowing why. He frowned as she finished. Not unkindly, thoughtfully, the way a man frowns when a memory is trying to surface and won't quite come all the way up. That is an old song. I have not heard that particular tune in many years. Where did you learn it? My mother, Amara said. She never told me where she learned it. She said she would tell me properly one day. She died before that day came. Baba Ez said nothing further in that moment, but something in his face had changed, and he did not forget it as he climbed back onto his repaired cart that evening. Over the following weeks, he began bringing small things. When his trade route brought him back a piece of ripe fruit, once slipped into her hand quickly as he passed. A warmer cloth, folded small, so it wouldn't be noticed, and confiscated. A pair of sandals, one afternoon, that actually fit her feet properly. The first she had owned since her mother died. Why are you kind to me? Amara asked him once, genuinely bewildered. No one had been kind to her without wanting something in return in 8 years. Baba has considered the question longer than it seemed to need. I had a daughter once, he said finally. She would be near your age now. If things had gone differently, let an old man be foolish. It costs so little to be kind, and I have watched too many people decide it costs too much. For a few months, Amara allowed herself something she had not permitted herself in years. Hope. Small hope. Careful hope, the kind that keeps its bags packed in case it needs to leave quickly. But hope, all the same. Perhaps, she let herself think, her life was finally beginning to turn towards something better. Perhaps this quiet, watchful kindness was the start of an actual change, the first crack of light in a door she had long since stopped trying to open. She began, cautiously, to imagine things. That Baba Ez might one day ask Chidinma to let her travel with his trade route as an assistant. That there might be a world beyond Umwabi, where firewood was not the only thing anyone ever saw when they looked at her. She pictured it in detail, the way lonely children often build entire worlds out of very little material. She would learn to keep his ledgers. She would see the towns along the trade route she had only ever heard named in passing, the river markets, the hill villages, the coastal town where, Baba Ez once told her, the water stretched so far it eventually became the sky. She would still hum her mother's tune, of course, but perhaps somewhere out there, on some unfamiliar road, someone might finally be able to tell her where it came from. It was the first time in 8 years she had allowed herself to imagine a future that looked different from the one Chidinma had already decided for her. She turned the daydream over and over at night on the veranda, careful and quiet, the way a person handles something breakable. It ended the way most things in Amara's life had learned to end. Chidinma caught Baba Ez sleeping Amara, a wrapped parcel of food near the market gate one afternoon, and fury, swift, ugly, and entirely disproportionate to what she was actually witnessing, rose in her immediately. She did not ask questions. She did not pause to consider that the old man's face held nothing but concern. "Thief!" she shouted, loud enough that half the market turned to look. "You think you can steal my niece from under my nose? Sell her to some distant household for your own profit? I know men like you." Baba Ez tried to explain. He held up his empty hands, palms out, his voice steady, even as the accusation spread through the gathered crowd like fire through dry grass. "I have done nothing but show the girl a small kindness," he said. "Ask her yourself." But Chidinma was already turning the crowd against him, and Amara, frozen at the center of the scene, found she could not make her voice work at all. Speaking up for herself had never once helped her in 8 years. She did not know how to begin now, in front of so many watching eyes, ashamed of the scene, and unwilling to bring the girl any more trouble than his kindness had already caused her. Baba S packed his cart that same evening and stopped coming to Omobi altogether. He did not even say goodbye. He simply never returned, and after a month of watching the trade road for a cart that never came, Amara understood he wasn't going to. The brief warmth closed over her life. The way water closes over a stone dropped into a still pond quickly, completely, as if it had never disturbed the surface at all. She went back to the forest. Back to the rain. Back to humming along, because it was the only way anyone let her keep anything at all. Chidinma never mentioned Baba is again, but she watched Amara more closely after that, as though the girl herself, and not the merchant, had been the danger all along. Chidinma's cruelty reached a peak. A trader from the next village over, wealthies feared, and 3 times Amara's age, came through Amobi that dry season looking for a new wife. His name was Okonkwo, and the whispers that followed him into any room he entered were not kind ones. 2 wives already, both young, both dead within a few years of the wedding. Both deaths quietly unexplained by anyone brave enough to ask questions of a man with his wealth and his temper. He came to Chidinma's compound himself, seated on a stool brought out especially for him, and looked Amara over the way a man might inspect livestock before purchase. "She is strong," Chidinma said quickly, before he could ask. "She has carried firewood since she was 8 years old. She does not complain. She works from sunrise." Okonkwo grunted, apparently satisfied, and named a bride price that made the whole compound go quiet when the number was finally spoken aloud, far more than Chidinma had ever seen offered for any. Chidinma did not hesitate. Not for a single day. To her, this was simply the final transaction in an arrangement. She had maintained profitably for 9 years, the last sale of an asset she had raised, fed just enough to keep functional, and worked without complaint since the girl was 8 years old. "We will have the wedding within the week," she told Okonkwo, already counting the bride price in her mind before a single coin had changed hands. That evening an old woman from Okonkwo's own village, a distant relative of Emi, passing through Amwabi on her way to a burial, pulled Amara aside at the well, her voice low and urgent. "You do not know that man," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder to be certain Chidinma was nowhere near. "I buried his first wife myself. 17 years old, same as you, gone within 2 harvest seasons. The second one, I helped bathe her body before burial. There were marks on her that no illness leaves behind. Run, child, if you have anywhere at all to run to." Amara had nowhere to run to. She had never had anywhere to run to. That was the entire architecture of the life Chidinma had built around her. No letters, no trade, no coin of her own, no family beyond the one that had just sold her for a bride price. She thanked the old woman for the warning and carried it back to the compound like one more stone added to a basket already too heavy to lift. She had never once begged Chidinma for anything in her life, not through 9 years of hunger, not through the mockery, not through the loneliness that had followed her since childhood. She begged now, on her knees in the mud outside the compound gate, rain soaking through her one good wrapper, for this single thing not to happen to her. "Please," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Not him. I have heard what happened to the others. Please, Auntie, I will work harder. I will carry double the wood. Anything, just not this." Chidinma's answer was not spoken. It was a slap hard enough to split Amara's lip, followed by 2 days locked inside the goat shed to correct her disrespect, with the wedding to Okonkwo arranged for the week that followed. "You will thank me one day," Chidinma said through the shed door, her voice flat, already walking away before she'd even finished the sentence. A wife's house is better than a beggar's veranda. You should be grateful I found you a husband at all, cursed as you are. This is the part of the story where I need you to stay with us, because what happens next is the reason this whole story exists. If you have made it this far, like this video right now, and tell me honestly in the comments, has there ever been one small thing you held on to just to survive a season you thought you might not survive? Locked in the shed, cold, hungry, and certain now that her life would end exactly the way Chidinma had always told her it would. Small, unseen, and entirely at someone else's disposal, Amara did the only thing she had left to do. She louder than she ever had before. Not for comfort this time. Comfort had stopped being enough somewhere around the second day without food, but out of something closer to defiance. Some small, stubborn ember in her refused to let the one thing that was truly hers die quietly. Unheard, in a goat shed on the edge of a village that had never once seen her as a person worth protecting, she sang it again and again, until her throat ached, until the words blurred into pure sound, until it no longer mattered whether anyone heard it at all. It was hers. It would remain hers, whatever happened next. She did not know that on the trade road passing, just beyond Omuabi's forest edge, King Obiora's royal convoy had stopped that same morning to water the horses before the final stretch home. She did not know the wind that day was carrying her voice much further than she could have imagined. Past the shed walls, past the compound fence, out toward a road she had never once had reason to walk. She only knew that the song was still hers, and that as long as she could still sing it, some part of her had not yet been taken. On the morning the shed door finally opened, Amara believed, for one long, terrible breath, that it was already the day of the wedding, that Chidinma had come to dress her and hand her over, and that the 2 days of hunger and cold had simply run out, the way she'd always known they eventually would. Her stomach dropped. Her hands, when she tried to lift them, were shaken too badly to be useful for anything at all. Instead, sunlight, thin, gray, rain-filtered sunlight, but sunlight all the same, spilled through the opening door, along with a sound she did not immediately recognize as horses and voices, and the particular commotion of far too many strangers for one small village compound to hold. She thought, absurdly, that Okonkwo had brought his entire household to witness the handover. She braced herself for it, the way she had learned to brace for every hard thing in her life quietly, alone, with no expectation that anyone was coming to change the outcome. What came instead was a king on his knees in her family's mud, weeping over 4 notes she had never once imagined were worth anything to anyone but her. King Obiora had ruled Edoran for 11 years, since his father's death, and in all that time, one grief had never once loosened its grip on his mother, Queen Mother Adez. 22 years earlier, during a brief and violent coup that had unseated their family, for less than a season before loyalist forces restored them, Adez's younger sister, a royal daughter herself, Obiora's own aunt, had vanished from the palace entirely. She had been carrying a child at the time, heavily pregnant, and in the chaos of that season no one had ever found either mother or infant, alive or dead. The royal family had waited years. Eventually, painfully, they had allowed themselves to assume the worst. The one thing that vanished with her, beyond the woman and the unborn child, was a lullaby, a private tune, composed generations back inside the palace nursery, taught only by strict and ancient tradition. 2 royal daughters, mother to daughter, and never once written down or spoken of outside those walls. As far as anyone left in Edera knew, that song had died with her, 22 years gone. That morning the convoy had stopped near Umyobi's forest edge for the ordinary business of watering horses before the final stretch home. The soldiers stretched their legs. A young guard named Chuka complained half-joking about the endless rain that had followed them for 3 straight days. At least it will make the crops grow, another guard answered, laughing. King Obiora said nothing. He had grown quieter over the years. His advisors had noticed. On this particular stretch of road that passed closest to where his aunt had last been seen alive, all those years ago, he always grew quiet here. No one asked why. Everyone already knew. Then, Faint under the sound of rain and horses and men's idle talk, 4 notes drifted across the field from somewhere near the village. Obiora's whole body went still. "Quiet," he said, and something in his voice made every soldier in the convoy actually obey. "Everyone, quiet." The notes came again, closer this time, or perhaps simply clearer now that 30 armed men had gone completely silent to listen for them. His horse reared beneath him. He had gripped the reins too tight without realizing it, and he was down off the animal and moving before his own guards had finished registering what was happening. "Your Majesty," Chuka started, hand already on his sword out of pure reflex. "Stay here," Obiora said, already walking. Already soaked through by rain, he didn't seem to notice at all. "All of you." He followed the sound past the compound fence, past a startled woman doing washing who dropped her basin entirely at the sight of the king of it, walking through her yard uninvited, straight to a small goat shed at the edge of the property, where the notes were coming from. Unmistakably now, clear as anything he had heard in 22 years, he did not send a guard to investigate. He pried the door open himself with his own 2 hands, in front of his entire startled convoy, who had disobeyed his order to stay behind within seconds of him giving it, unable to help themselves. Inside, a young woman looked up at him, a stranger in fine rain-soaked robes, staring at her as though he had seen something impossible. "Sing it again," he said. His voice cracked on the 3rd word. Amara stared back at him, frightened, certain this was some new punishment she didn't understand, and couldn't begin to predict. A strange man in fine clothes, an entire convoy of armed soldiers crowding the shed doorway behind him, rain pouring in around all of them. I did nothing wrong," she managed. "Please. I was only." "Please," Obiora said, and something in the way he said it, raw, pleading, nothing at all like a king commanding a subject, made her stop. "Sing it again. That song." "Please." She sang it again, her voice shaking, still uncertain whether this was rescue or some new danger she hadn't yet identified. King Obiora sank to his knees in the mud of the goat shed floor, in front of every soldier he commanded, and wept. Soldiers, who had followed him despite his order to stay behind, stood frozen in the shed doorway, none of them daring to speak, none of them having ever once seen their king display anything less than composed authority in 11 years of service. Shuka, the young guard who had complained about the rain not an hour earlier, found his own eyes stinging without fully understanding why. Something about watching a king weep openly in the mud, in front of a goat shed, over a girl none of them had ever heard of until that morning, made the whole scene feel larger than any of them. Larger than rank or protocol or the careful distance a soldier is trained to keep from his king's private grief. Amara herself did not move. She could not have said, in that moment, whether she was more frightened or more confused. Kneeling in the straw with mud-soaked robes, belonging to a stranger, pooling water around her bare feet. 9 years of learning not to hope for anything had left her poorly equipped for a moment that demanded exactly that. By the time Chidinma arrived at the shed, drawn out of her house by the commotion of royal horses stamping outside her own gate and 30 soldiers crowded around her goat shed, she found the king of Aduran weeping openly in the mud over the girl she had spent 9 years calling worthless. Her face went the color of cold ash. "Your Majesty," Chidinma stammered, dropping into a bow so fast she nearly fell, her mind already racing to reassemble the story she would need to tell. "Forgive us. I had no idea. If I had known the girl caused any trouble." "Trouble?" Obiora rose, unsteady, his soldiers watching in stunned silence as their king wiped mud and tears from his own face, without any apparent shame at all. "That song," he said, turning to face the small, gathering crowd, villagers now spilling out of their homes to see what had brought the king himself to their compound, has been taught to exactly 1 woman outside these palace walls in the last 50 years. My aunt, who vanished 22 years ago, carrying a child. He turned back to Amara, and though his voice still shook, it had begun to find its old authority underneath the shaking. "What was your mother's name?" "Ngozi," Amara whispered, the word barely making it out of her throat. It was enough. Word was sent to the palace that same hour, riders dispatched at a gallop despite the rain, and Queen Mother Adeus arrived in Omwabi before nightfall. Traveling faster than protocol or dignity generally allowed a woman of her station to travel. Arriving still in her house clothes, her carriage barely stopped before she was already climbing down from it unassisted. She did not need to hear the song a second time to know the truth of it. One look at Amara's face, her own sister's face, 22 years younger, worn thin by 9 years of labor and grief, the girl had never once been permitted to name aloud, told her everything the tune already had. Her carriage had barely come to a stop at the edge of Umwobi before the entire village had gathered along the road, drawn by torchlight and rumor and the astonishing sight of royal banners moving through their small, muddy streets. After dark, Chidinma's 3 children stood frozen near the compound gate. Ifeoma, watching from the doorway, pressed a hand to her mouth. Even Emeka, silent as ever, had come out to see what his wife's 9 years of cruelty had, without her knowledge, been living under their own roof the entire time. "You have your mother's eyes," Ade said, crossing the muddy yard to kneel directly in front of the trembling, disbelieving girl, taking her filthy, work-hardened hands in her own, without a moment's hesitation. Her voice broke on every single word of it. "I searched for you for 22 years. I sent riders to every village within 3 kingdoms. I was told, eventually, that you were dead. Both of you. I mourned you before you were even old enough to speak." Amara, still kneeling in the mud where she had collapsed, the moment the shed door opened, could not speak at all. 9 years of being told she was worth nothing had not prepared her for a single sentence claiming the opposite, let alone an entire kingdom's worth of them, delivered all at once by a woman who was apparently, in a way that made her head spin faster than the fever fog, she barely remembered from the night her mother died. "I don't understand," she finally managed. The only honest thing she could think to say, "I am nobody. I sell firewood." "You are the daughter of a princess of Adiran," Adeus said gently, "and you have been nobody's daughter long enough. That ends today." Chidinma, watching from the edge of the gathered crowd, understood with sudden, sickening clarity exactly what she had spent 9 years mistreating, mocking, and nearly selling off to a man with 2 dead wives already behind him. She said nothing. There was, for the first time in Amara's memory, genuinely nothing left for Chidinma to say. Chidinma's fate, in the days that followed the revelation, was left entirely in Queen Mother Adiz's hands, and the Queen Mother's mercy, in the end, proved far greater than most of Umwobi expected, and greater, certainly, than Chidinma had ever once shown Amara across 9 long years. There was a public reckoning before the full council of village elders. Every detail of the last 9 years laid bare in front of the same neighbors who had once called Amara cursed and looked away rather than help her. Pa Namdi, the same elder who had once shamed Chidinma into taking the orphan girl in, stood and testified to what he had long suspected but never confronted. Mama Yuju, ashamed now of the rumors she had once so eagerly carried from household to household, would not meet anyone's eyes. There was restitution paid, in full, from Chidinma's own household stores. For every year of unpaid labor, Amara had given without complaint or wage, and there was permanent exile from any future royal favor or protection. A quiet, thorough severing of every advantage. Chidinma had ever hoped her connection to a royal niece might one day bring her family, but no worse than that. Amara herself asked for nothing crueler when the Queen Mother turned to her in front of the assembled council and asked plainly what justice she wanted done. 9 years of cruelty had taught her exactly what it cost to live inside cruelty, and she found, in the end, she had no wish to build a second lifetime the same way, no matter how deeply some part of her still ached from every switch, every slap, every year of quota-driven, rain-soaked labor. "Let her go," Amara said simply. "I do not want her punished the way she punished me. I only want to never see her again." It was granted. Amara was brought to the palace within the month, and the transformation the village of Umwobi witnessed the Firewood girl becoming, quite visibly. A princess of Adiran, in fact, and not merely by forgotten birthright, became the story told at every fireside gathering for a full year afterward. She struggled, at first, with palace life in ways no one quite expected. She did not know how to sit in the grand dining hall without feeling like an intruder. She startled at the sound of servants addressing her as Your Highness. Some nights, in her new soft bed inside stone walls that had stood for 300 years, she found herself missing the veranda. Oddly enough, not the hunger, not the cold, but the particular quiet of it, the only place that had ever truly been hers. Queen Mother Ades, patient in ways Chidinma had never once managed to be, gave her the time the transition required. King Obiora, for his part, found himself drawn to his newly discovered cousin in a way that surprised them both, and within 2 years, what had begun as royal kinship had grown, slowly and carefully, into something neither of them had expected, but both eventually chose without hesitation. Amara married into the very throne she had been born beside, but never once told she belonged to. One of the first things she did, once palace life had settled enough to allow it, was send riders out along every trade road in Edoran, searching for a cloth merchant named Baba Ez. It took 2 months to find him, older now's cartwheels, more worn, still traveling the same routes he had traveled for 30 years. When the royal riders found him and explained why they had come, the old man wept in the middle of the road, certain at first that he was somehow in trouble for a kindness shown 9 years earlier. He was not in trouble. He was invited to the palace as an honored guest, and when Amara embraced him in front of the entire royal court, she made certain every person present understood exactly what his small, unrewarded kindness had once meant. To a girl the rest of the world had decided wasn't worth noticing. "You said kindness costs so little," she told him, "and that too many people decide it costs too much anyway." I have never forgotten it. Her wedding to King Obiora, held the following dry season, was attended by half of Edoran, and El Amara's own quiet insistence, by every family from Umwobi who wished to come, including, to the whispered astonishment of the gathered court, Ifiema, who had written a nervous, careful letter of congratulations months earlier that Amara had chosen, deliberately, to answer with an invitation rather than silence. The 2 young women never became close. Not truly. Not after 9 years of unequal treatment neither of them could fully undo. But Amara found, standing across from her that day, that she no longer carried the old resentment the way she once thought she always would. There was room, she discovered, for forgiveness that did not require forgetting. Uch, the boy who had once avoided her eyes on the road once the whispers began, sent no letter and attended no wedding, and Amara found she did not think of him again after that season passed. Some doors, once closed, are simply meant to stay that way. 10 years later, the people of Umwobi still tell the story of the day the king of Edoran wept in a goat shed on the edge of their village, though. These days, the children who hear it told around the evening fire are usually far more interested in the woman who comes to visit once a year, unannounced, in plain traveling clothes, to sit with the village's poorest families and share a cup of palm wine with anyone old, enough to remember her as the Firewood girl. "Is it true?" a small girl asked her once during one such visit, tugging at her sleeve the way Amara herself had once tugged at her mother's wrapper, "that you used to carry firewood every single day, even in the rain." "Every single day," Amara confirmed, smiling, "even in the rain." "And you became a queen anyway." "Not anyway," Amara said, crouching down to the girl's eye level. "Because of it, in a way. The song that saved me was the one thing nobody could ever take. No matter how hard they tried, remember that. Whatever you are carrying, however heavy it feels, keep the one thing that is truly yours. You never know which road it will find its way down." Queen Amara still hums the old tune, sometimes in the palace nursery, where it was first composed, generations before her. To her own children now, the 5th generation, to inherit 4 simple lines that once nearly vanished forever in a goat shed in the rain, her eldest daughter has already begun to hum it back to her, unprompted, the way children do when a sound has settled deep enough into a household to become simply part of the air. Sometimes, in the quiet hour before the palace wakes, Amara walks alone to the nursery window and looks out over Adiran's hills, and lets herself remember, briefly and without bitterness. The girl who once carried firewood through the rain and had nothing in the world but a tune she didn't understand. She does not resent that girl or pity her, the way she once feared she might if this day ever came. She simply carries her forward, the way a person carries any true thing that shaped them, quietly, gratefully, and without needing to be asked. The song survived a coup. It survived a mother's death. It survived 9 years of cruelty and 22 years of silence nobody thought could ever be broken. In the end, It could not survive the truth. A song remembered is a debt time cannot erase.